All right, class, let's get started with our first board. This is AP World History. Our topic, the classical era. We have 5 different units talking about prehistory. Our essential question, how did people come together to create civilizations? So we're talking about, quite a few years ago. In the beginning, there were nomads or Paleolithic, where there was absolutely no civilizations, no cities, no farming. The use of stone tools was the most productive that the nomads or Paleolithic time period. There were foraging societies, the hunter-gatherers, where people would actually rely upon what grew in nature, and that's what they ate and what they subsisted on. There were no permanent shelters or houses. People lived quite harshly at this time, caves and or would try to find shelter in trees or whatever they could. It started to progress into pastoral societies with the domestication of animals. There's only a handful of animals, like cows, pigs, horses, that were able to be domesticated. They tried to domesticate the zebra, but it's just too wild or whatever. So there's only a handful of animals that at this time that they were able to domesticate and utilize in small herds to be able to feed their people. Still no permanent housing. They would constantly people would constantly have to move to get grazing for their animals. So once again, this was a nomadic time period where people were constantly moving. Now, the second time period we're going to talk about is the Neolithic Revolution, where we started to see agricultural societies. People settled down in small towns that had reliable soil and water. And from these reliable sources, they were able to then start to grow some crops. People started to sustain cultural traditions. Once you had people in the same area growing crops, the same kind of cultural attributes would start to arise. Ownership in land and or houses started to become a factor. So this was the first time people said, that's my land or that's my house, instead of being nomads and wandering around all over the place. Okay, some of the consequences of agriculture was food surplus, having extra amounts of food. Food surplus led to other specializations, and when I say other specializations, meaning that if you didn't have to grow crops, if somebody else grew crops and could sustain a small community, then I might become a blacksmith, or I might become a politician, or I might become the town mayor, or whatever the case might be. But it gave this opportunity for food surplus. Invention of irrigation led to even more complex growth. So irrigation in and around the river valleys led to a much larger amount of food to be grown. Now, the impact of agriculture on the environment. Agriculture led to the creation of towns and cities, and clearly when towns and cities are being built or created, there's you got to move those rocks, you got to take down that wall, you got to bulldoze that hill, chop down those trees. There's definitely going to be impact on the environment. Animals used to help in farming, so that once they domesticated the animals and you could hook up a plow or whatever to ox or to cattle or to whatever, horses, that definitely increased the amount of food that was able to be created. Now, technology, you started to have metal workers, but before that time you had granite tools, pottery, wheels. These are all inventions during this time frame, and you're like, the wheel, what's that's technology. Well, during this time frame it was. But by far the most important was when metallists started to put together different kinds of metal in different proportions, such as copper and tin, and that became bronze, and that would eventually lead to the Bronze Era, and that would highly increase the amount of effectiveness for tools and for weapons. So this wraps up our first boards that you need to take Cornell notes on. This is a short one. In the future, they'll be longer, sometimes much longer. but you need to take some Cornell notes on this, and welcome to AP World History. Thank you.